Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. In this show, we cover a broad range of topics that cater to both CRE newcomers and industry leaders alike. I am your host, Ryan Schlesinger, Director of Revenue Operations at Crexi, a comprehensive digital commercial real estate platform designed to empower CRE real estate professionals with the tools they need to discover and transact property. Today, we are thrilled to discuss SIOR, the next generation of CRE professionals, and much, much more with Patrick Sentner. A little about Patrick. Patrick serves as the Executive Vice President within Advisory and Transaction Services Division of CBRE's Occupier Services Group in Pittsburgh, focused on local user and national corporate services and tenant representation. With more than 25 years in the CRE industry, Patrick's vast knowledge of the local market, his ability to quickly and accurately evaluate a prospective tenant's needs, as well as his connectivity with the brokerage community, enable him to guide his clients successfully toward real estate objectives. Prior to joining CBRE in March 2017, Patrick was founding principal at Colliers International, Pittsburgh, and NAI Pittsburgh Commercial, where he specialized in directing office, industrial, and user representation, while also playing an integral role in overall corporate services. During his real estate tenure, he was also vice president at Oxford Development Company. Patrick has been a member of SIOR for 19 years and has served in various leadership roles throughout the organization, currently as Global President-elect and as of fall 2021, Global President. He also sits on the SIOR Board of Directors, the Western PA Chapter, and the SIOR Foundation Board of Trustees. Patrick has also received various accolades throughout his career, including the Colliers International's Everest Award for Top Performance 4 times, NAI Global's Top Performer Award 3 times, and NAI Global's Vision Award, to name a few. Pat, welcome to the podcast. Let's dive in.
How you doing today? That sounds good. Doing very well, thank you.
Obviously an illustrious intro there. So clearly you've been in the real estate business for a long time, and I want to hear about, obviously how you got into the profession, but even for starters, just what's your background, where you grew up, where you're from, and, we'll piece our way to how you got into CRE.
No, absolutely. And yes, as you were reading that, I started realizing I've been doing this for an awful long time, but there's a reason. I absolutely love it, which has been fantastic. But to answer your question, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, went to a small liberal arts college here in Western PA known as Westminster College. And coming out of Westminster, I was a finance major. And ultimately, because I was a finance major, I only interviewed with banks. And luckily for me, I ended up going with a bank that actually allowed me to work on the commercial lending side, which indirectly got me involved with commercial real estate, which was fantastic. So between working at the bank for about 6 years, in all parts of Western PA, including towns that you may never even heard of, including Oil City and Titusville, I have been a true Pennsylvanian and specifically a Pittsburgher, as we like to call ourselves, for my entire life. What's about the only Pittsburgh E's I don't have, because my parents didn't mind me, speaking in a Pittsburgh accent, but I wasn't allowed to say yins growing up. So other than that, I'm a Pittsburgher through and through.
Got it. So that's great. I think Pittsburgh's a very interesting real estate town. Obviously has gone through a lot of changes and transformations, which I'm sure you've kind of experienced throughout your time there. So you started out in banking or in mortgage banking, it sounds like. Is that right?
To a point, I was doing commercial lending, so I had a little bit of everything. I did tax anticipation notes for local municipalities. I did real estate lending for local residential developers as well as commercial developers, and basically, anything that you would need outside of doing residential mortgages and home equity loans, those types of things.
Sure.
So it was a good background, but it was not something that I was passionate about. And as much as I loved the people I worked with, I realized I was not passionate about my work, and that was something I knew I had to change.
So I like that you touched on, the people. I think a lot of people who get into real estate appreciate what a people-oriented business it is. I guess, whether it was the people or the network you created, how did you, mosey on into more real estate brokerage?
It's funny how it worked because ultimately, in my mind as a banker, I was not a salesperson. I was not somebody that was supposed to be doing cold calls. But the reality of it is, once I started working on a project in the Cranberry section of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I was going to be doing hopefully the commercial mortgage on a new office building. And while working on that project, I got to meet the broker who was going to be representing the property. And this gentleman, I really hit it off. And so I just kept calling him to go to breakfast. And I remember many times over blueberry pancakes at King's, I learned more about the commercial brokerage industry than I had in the previous 26 years of my life combined. And honestly, I didn't stop. I was starting to find out that I was very passionate about it. So I basically cold called this guy, and I couldn't even say cold call, but I just kept calling him, asking if they needed somebody, to work in their department. And finally, he said, "Hey, I have something that's about to happen, and when it does, I will give you a call." And he was brought over to head up the third-party brokerage group at Oxford Development Company, and I was the first person that he brought in with him. And from that point on, there was no looking back.
That's great. So you make your way from commercial lending over to Oxford Development. I'm assuming still in Pittsburgh. How long were you? How long were you with Oxford, and where? How did that end up taking you closer to? I believe it was your first stop in brokerage at NAI.
No, actually, my first stop at brokerage was at Oxford, because even though they were and still are a phenomenal developer with in-house brokerage, they at that time did not have a third-party brokerage group, for individuals who were representing corporations and users of space. And so I literally dove into that side of the business right away. And it was a fantastic experience, and spent 8 years doing that. And candidly, the only reason that we left was that we wanted an opportunity to do it on our own and to actually start our company from scratch and try to make a go at it. And so after 8 years, we did that, started a company that was legally known as Pittsburgh Commercial Real Estate Incorporated, and then we affiliated right away with NAI, who provided us a real nice national backing. And in turn, when I say backing, I mean giving us dots on a map, whereby we knew if we had Pittsburgh-based clients who needed to have office space in Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, that we would have other NAI offices that help us in those markets. So that's why we left Oxford, again, just to start it on our own and to make a go at it.
Sure, and I think a lot of brokers obviously gravitate towards those national platforms just for some of those items you said. I guess what do you really look for in that national platform past kind of the coverage? Is there resources? Is the relationships? I guess maybe if you could explain some of those advantages.
It really comes down to corporations and real estate companies improving over time. So if you would have asked me that question when we started our company, back in, I think it was 2004, my answer would have been, knowing that we had good people with solid local market knowledge throughout the country. And candidly, that was basically it. That's what we were looking for. However, over time, that has changed dramatically. And you look at the organization that I'm with right now, CBRE, the number of resources that they have that I in turn can provide to my clients is just beyond anything that I've ever dreamed of. And my partner Amy Broadhurst, who is with me at CBRE, she and I are actually able to go after new business that candidly we wouldn't have been able to go after, in an organization that didn't have the resources like a CBRE or a JLL or some of the other larger organizations. What existed in the early 2000s just does not meet the requirements for what clients are looking for today, which is why all these national and global platforms have really improved over time, which is also why there's been so much consolidation of these companies over the past 20 years.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to come back to that, but let's go back to NAI. So what year is it? You leave Oxford for NAI?
2004.
2004. And so how long were you at NAI for?
So we were at NAI for just about 5.5 years, and really had good relationships, with the regional directors, ownership, senior management, et cetera. What we realized, though, by the calls that we were getting from other firms was that we must be doing something right, as our local shop. And we started getting recruited by a number of other firms, including Colliers. And, candidly, Colliers made a really good pitch to us. And they had a really strong corporate service team that I believe was out of Atlanta. And that was something personally that was very appealing to me. I also knew a lot of good corporate service brokers who were at Colliers from SIOR, which, I've been an SIOR member since the early 2000s. So by, knowing people at other firms, and I remember I had a friend of mine down in Tennessee. He had been NAI before and then had switched over to Colliers. And, while he also loved NAI at the time, Colliers just gave him a platform that really, really worked out well. And that resonated with me. That gentleman is somebody I trusted and absolutely, provided some good advice. And collectively, we as a team decided to leave NAI, even though the call that I made to our counterpart at NAI Global was tough, because the respect level I had and still to this day have for that gentleman and the entire team was off the charts. So that was honestly worse than breaking up with your long-term girlfriend in college.
I believe
it. But to this day, we still have good friends, and some of my closest colleagues in the business are NAI brokers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love to see the, I think Pittsburgh definitely is kind of in that market size too, that lends itself to the brokerage community being pretty tight knit. Whereas sometimes in those larger markets, you may not really know all the players, which I think creates a really nice community when you can have that dynamic. So it's what, about 2009, 2010 when you make the move over?
Correct, 2010. Yep.
So it's 2010. You're 2 years removed from, what at the time was one of the cataclysmic economic events and obviously had a massive impact on the CRE industry. What was it like kind of, switching platforms during that time?
You know what? When all was said and done, those first couple years, honestly, after the financial crisis, I don't think the platform mattered that much, just because all of us had to hunker down and really just focus on our local business. And while I have not gone back to look at the numbers, my guess is that a great many of the projects that we worked on in 10, 11, 12 were local. And, because again, we kind of just, like most groups, said, hey, we're going to keep this thing moving. But, what do we have to do to keep our employees on board and to keep the company growing? So we really did a good job focusing on local business. We were able to pull in some really good agency assignments and had some local sales assignments and some local industrial assignments that all worked really, really well to keep us rolling. Once we were through the financial issues, associated with the financial crisis, we then really started seeing the strength that Colliers was able to provide to us, with some good inbound business that was coming to us from some brokers across the country. And at the same time, we were sending out a good bit of business to other Colliers offices across the country. And the back and forth was really good. We had some great professionals that we worked with, in markets like Houston and Dallas and, California, in fact, probably multiple parts of California. And it was really a good group of people that we were working with at Colliers.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm glad you hear like the strength of that platform. I would expect, especially for someone like you in that corporate services space with people with national needs, would probably be even more helpful. So how did you kind of balance? Because clearly, at the time, and I'm sure even today, you kind of have a bit of a hybrid between local clients and national clients. What does that split look like? Is it half and half or?
I would say it does vary year to year, but on average, I would say it's about 50-50.
Got it.
We've had like last year, I would say it was probably 65%, maybe 70% out of market, whereby, in some of those years that I was just describing, we were probably the exact opposite, whereby it was probably 65 or 70% in Pittsburgh.
Got it. So it sounds like obviously, excuse me, the national platform at Colliers was super helpful coming out of the recession. And then you obviously saw, enormous CRE expansion nationwide. And I'm sure, every market, came out of that differently. But, how maybe walk me through those next few years and what was the path that kind of ended up leading you to CBRE?
I will say, like any good salesperson, it was a cold call by Jeffrey Ackerman, who is the managing director of the Pittsburgh office, to me.
Uh-huh.
And, due to my respect for him, I'm like, sure, I'll go out to have lunch with you. And then he starts talking about CB. And I said, Jeffrey, with all due respect, you do know that I own, a big chunk of our business. And he said, of course. He said, Pat, with all due respect, do you enjoy the administrative? Do you enjoy the HR? Do you enjoy, every aspect associated with that? And I just looked at him, sighed, and said, no, not at all. And he said, that's why I called you. So we talked off and on probably for over a year. And, the more I really looked at it and looked at what made me happy, and candidly, that was taking care of my clients and, coming up with really interesting projects and not having to worry about, taking care of, 20 other employees. Now, admittedly, I had some great partners, who were there as well. But the way I'm wired is, I'm doing this for everybody, not just for me and my family. And to have the opportunity to really just focus on my clients versus, the operation of a business was refreshing. And while I missed, the folks over at Colliers, and in fact, some of them were still not only my closest friends in the industry, but my closest friends in the world. Ultimately, I realized that, hey, I'm going to be doing this for the next 15 years. And I want to do this to the highest level I possibly can. And honestly, CB offered me the ability to do so.
Awesome. I mean, that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think it speaks to the strength of the platform. And you clearly kind of went from doing it more on your own to growing your platform at Colliers, and then I think CB, which obviously offers you an expansive amount of resources in terms of just managing the administrative back office side of things, which I'm sure, like you said, just allowed you to focus on the client. So, you mentioned Jeffrey Ackerman, a name I recognize from my days at Crexi of cold calling the Northeast. And I think that, touches on something that you named a few people, but along the way, I guess, who are the most influential mentors or colleagues that, you came across in that journey?
So obviously the first one has to be Bill Leone, who is the person that brought me into the business in the first place. And, I would not even be in this industry if Bill didn't, take my call and then help, over the next 10 plus years, foster me into being, the best broker I possibly could be. So I'll always be grateful for that. The next one would be, one of my original founding partners, and that's Greg Brugis. And from Greg, I learned that you can work as hard as anybody in the business and at the same time still be possibly the nicest person that you're ever going to find. And, early on in this business, I was, told by many people that, hey, you have to protect yourself. You can't trust people. There's too much money involved. And as a result, you just need to be careful. Luckily, that's some of the, only advice that I did not pay heed to. And in turn, I've probably been more trusting than I probably should have been. But honestly, it's helped foster, some phenomenal relationships, not only, with co-brokers, but also with my clients, landlords, et cetera. And, Greg was one of the people and probably the main person that really, let me see that you could do it both, i.e. be an extremely successful broker while at the same time treating everybody, with more respect than you could ever imagine
Sure.
was possible.
Yeah, that's great. I think, I remember just back from working in real estate, there are kind of these figures that, you really look up to and just, again, just the people oriented and market specific. You kind of have these hollowed figures that stay with you. And it's always good to hear who that was for other people.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes it fun
Yeah.
now because my partner, Amy, is, she's in her 30s, but she's been, a successful broker for almost 15 years now. And she has brought a completely different perspective to not only our business, but my entire mindset and how to look at things. And it truly has been, as good of a partnership as I could have ever dreamed of. And, we don't think the same way. And that helps tremendously. So we're really able to provide, at least in my opinion, a really good level of service, in fact, top of the line level of service to our clients, because we can come at, problems, issues, et cetera, from two completely different facets that come up with, the ultimate solution for our clients.
Sure. And so, staying on the topic of your clients, you've obviously worked on the tenant rep, more demand side of the market for pretty much, is it your whole career or just the majority?
I've only had 2 real listing assignments in my entire career, and both
Wow.
were, I had to actually be, candidly, both were actually grand slams, but in both cases, I had to be talked into doing those. So
Sure.
sometimes I step back and say, seriously, 2 of the bigger projects I've ever worked on in my career were both on the agency side. And in neither case did I want to be involved in them, but it all worked out extremely well.
Well, there you go. I think, I'm more curious, and I'm sure obviously you kind of find a groove and you get comfortable and things kind of flow from there. But, I guess what kind of attracted you to that side, or at least made you want to remain staying in the tenant rep side, rather, like you said, staying away from the agency side?
Honestly, it goes back to my original multi-market client, a company, an insurance brokerage company that no longer exists, called HRH. And HRH, when I first started working with them, had about 60 locations across the country. And by the time they were purchased by, I think it was Willis, it was closer to 130, 140. And the reason that I enjoyed that was because I truly got to know, basically a dozen people in that organization extremely well, from the real estate director to the controller to the CFO to the general counsel to the assistant general counsel to the chief operating officer to the CEO to the regional managers. And that's when I realized how much I love doing what I do, because I was able to interact with a lot of really good people. And it is really what got me passionate about, the business. It wasn't just taking care of, a national landlord that just needs to fill space, which, is a great job. Let's put it that. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. But here I was taking on personally the needs of these individuals. And, obviously the controller had a completely different mindset of what needed to be done than the regional manager, which was very different than maybe even what the CEO wanted. So having to work with each of them to come up with the right real estate solution, literally on almost every one of the projects, really was enjoyable. It was a great challenge, and it was fun to meet the needs of individuals and a corporation, and not just a corporation.
Got it. No, that makes total sense, and I can see how that would be rewarding, obviously, to kind of have those like long, sustaining relationships where you can continue to deliver. So you've now, how long have you been at CBRE?
I have been there for almost 4.5 years now.
Gotcha. So, even in the last 4.5 years, obviously much has changed, especially in the last year and a half. To kind of take it more to present day, uh, how has your outlook changed, and how have your clients' demands changed, and what have you done to sort of go about meeting them in the ever evolving landscape post COVID?
The one thing that really has changed is we're much more consultative than we had been in the past, and you have to look at things from not just a transactional standpoint. And we had always tried to do more than just that over the past 2 decades, but now it's even more important. Now you have to look at things and say, all right, if we're going to be setting up a new office, do we want to just do what we've always done, which has worked, or do we want to create a new environment? And it's been in a weird way fun over the past 6 to 9 months, brainstorming with companies as to how their space is going to be configured. I have one group in particular. They downsized greatly because they weren't going to mandate their employees come into the office. However, they ended up building out a really, really attractive new office space that had a ton of collaboration area, which in turn was to be a draw to get the employees to want to be in the office. And as a result, we ended up negotiating a clause that was something that we really hadn't looked at in the past. But here it was a situation where if the employees really liked coming into the office, the landlord agreed that, hey, if they need to double in space, the landlord will accommodate that, or the lease can be terminated. In general, those are always those pie in the sky type things you might just ask for, when you're representing a tenant. But in this case, it was a legitimate concern,
Sure.
especially from an optimistic standpoint, because I do believe that when they move into this new space, the employees are going to be blown away and want to be there, more than just 2 or 3 days a week.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And I think, where you probably have an interesting view of things is getting to work with industrial tenants as well as office tenants. And, aside from the obvious, where in an office most people can work remote, most industrial tenants probably don't have that luxury. So, have you kind of seen, is there any dynamic that may be more unique than someone would consider, other than that industrial work can't really be brought home with you?
In the grand scheme of things, I would say no, because the industrial side, you basically have, the way I've always looked at it, two different types of users. You have distribution, and then you have manufacturing. And most of the manufacturing, and as I'll say, older warehouse type spots, those places aren't going to relocate, simply based upon the fact that you have a ton of infrastructure in place, whether that be electrical or cranes, et cetera. And when you are looking to move those, it's going to be a situation where you're going to consolidate
Hmm.
operations, maybe in a region. So there is less fluidity on that side. So if you are working in that manufacturing facility, the reality of it is maybe the tenant will have a little bit better of a uh, kitchen area or some other amenities, but for the most part, it is going to be what it's going to be. What you ultimately see, though, on the distribution side is the importance of being closer to the consumer. So in that case, it's not just, the big names that you hear about regularly, but it's even the local grocery
Hmm.
stores and, milk producers, et cetera.
Sure.
Uh, we've seen the change in dynamics, on the retail side of the world. And even though I don't do retail, I'm in communication with our retail brokers, on at least a weekly basis. And it's really been interesting because while the companies are still going to have retail storefronts, they're not going to have, the big warehouses behind their stores anymore. And in turn, they're going to be, an hour, 2 hours, maybe no more than 3 or 4 hours, using 3 hours
Hmm.
away. And so as a result, on those cases, when you're building new distribution centers, they are in fact being built with some really good features for the employees to be able to, have good showers, workout facilities, etc. But those are newer buildings where you can actually design it with that in mind, because these groups are, like most companies today, having a tough time hiring people. So you want to be able to provide the necessary amenities, to differentiate your distribution center
Hmm.
from, someone else's, which is exactly what the office users are doing right now too, because and it's not just kids coming out of college. It's, all employees right now have opportunities elsewhere that they may not have had in the past. So employers have to really come up with a good plan to provide a great working environment, that their employees want to come into.
So, would it be fair? Because I like how you kind of simply bucketed industrial into distribution and manufacturing. Kind of makes it easy to consider the profiles. Distribution, obviously, just by the nature of it, I would assume would have to. What's the best way to describe it? Would adhere to sort of the market dynamics similar to retail and multifamily and office. Where population and job growth is, the distribution needs to meet. Does manufacturing is are they a little more agnostic to those factors than distribution?
You know what? It depends, and I don't mean to get into the weeds too much here, but it depends upon the level of manufacturing. And I know here in Western Pennsylvania, we have a lot of manufacturers that are coming out of CMU. So you're talking high
Sure.
level manufacturing where it is imperative that they retain or attract and then retain the top level talent.
Got it.
So in those cases, um, they're paying a lot more in rent because they need to be closer to
To the
where the
talent.
universities are and to the town and where the amenities are. And that obviously is very different than, manufacturing, of steel products or other things that, there are other financial concerns associated with a
Mhm.
manufacturing operation, whereby some of the newer high end manufacturing, candidly, it's the talent that drives that almost more than the actual facility itself.
Sure, and I know obviously you kinda hybrid between local and national, but where would you say your clients or the people you talk to within CB, and especially since I think COVID changed a lot of this, where do they see the talent going, and where do your clients feel like they need to be, whether it's on a local level or probably national?
You can almost pick any city in North America and figure out where the best universities are in each of those cities. And in essence, you want to be as close to them as possible. I'll use Pittsburgh as an example. We are so blessed to have Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Pittsburgh, and a number of other really good colleges, all in the same general area in Pittsburgh, literally 2 or 3 miles outside of our central business district. And I'll give them credit. This is something that Google came up with, almost 20 years ago. They did a survey and realized how many people they were hiring out of Carnegie Mellon. So they decided to open up an office in Pittsburgh. However, they said we have to open up this office literally on the campus of CMU,
Huh.
which is what they did, because that being the case, a student could get a job at Google as a junior, still go to school full time,
Mhm.
still live in the same apartment. And then when they graduated, they didn't have to move apartments. They just simply walked to a different building on campus,
That's
and
fascinating.
was able to work with one of the world's greatest companies. And once Google did that, we had virtually every other national, global, local, and regional group that would ever recruit out of CMU and Pitt start locating in those same areas. And it ended up creating a completely new, as I'll call it, flex office market that
Got it.
didn't exist in the past. And if I lived in my own little box and said I never got outside of Pittsburgh, I'm like, wow, the Strip District of Pittsburgh and the Oakland area and East Liberty, these are the greatest places you'll ever imagine. It can't be duplicated elsewhere. However, because I've gone to many other cities, I'll walk into another city and I'm like, oh, wait, this must be the Strip District version of Nashville, or this must be the Strip District version of Chicago, or whatever. And we're seeing that throughout the country. And so what ultimately happens is we'll have clients that will call and say, hey, we want to be located near, in this case, CMU. Okay, that's great. Are you willing to pay $10 a square foot more, if not more than that, to be closer to the universities, or is price an issue for you? And that is, really the first time we've ever had those kind of conversations,
Mm-hmm.
because for decades in Pittsburgh, we probably didn't have more than a $5 or $6 delta between buildings. But because of some of these newer buildings that have been purchased, we can actually see a $20 delta
Wow.
between existing product and brand new product. That's something that did not exist here before. I've seen that doing projects in New York and in San Francisco, where it depends upon where the market is at that time. One day you may get a lease at 50, the next day it might be 95. They had that kind of fluctuation.
Wow.
Pittsburgh never had that, and a lot of markets across the country never had that either until recently.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think in looking towards the future, and I think that is a really interesting dynamic about the talent coming from universities. Do you think that that was perhaps heightened from pandemic and obviously the strain that's been on employment needs for a lot of companies? And I guess looking forward to the rest of this year or 2022, where do you see tenants wanting to go on a macro level, whether it be industrial, office? How are people adapting, and what's next year going to look like?
You know what? It's interesting because what we have seen is, this is the fourth bubble that I've been involved in. Um, First one was on the banking side, and the next three, well, as a broker, whereby the dynamics are very different. And by that, I mean, we have a lot of sublease space that is on the market, but in almost every one of the cases, it's not because of the fact that the companies are doing poorly. What it comes down to is that the companies are all looking at a different way to structure their real estate needs. Like we have one group in particular that they realized that their IT department was on the road on a daily basis. So why did they need to have a significant amount of square footage assigned solely to the IT department? And ultimately, that then became available sublease space. And I'm bringing that up because now we're seeing um, numbers on the sublease side, and we're not talking 1, 2, or 3 year subleases like we may have seen in the past. Now we're seeing 5, 7, and even 10-year subleases that are available. So now a company that absolutely would have said, I need to be by the universities, might say, hey, I'll be 2 miles further away, but I'll be in a Class A office building and I'll be paying 60% less or 50% less in rent. And in turn, I can spend more on my space to try to attract, our new employees versus, being, at, main and main of where the employees are looking to be. So now it's gotten to the point where the financial side of doing a long-term lease has to be put into place more so than in the past, because now you might be able to say, wow, I can still get a great space that will be really enticing to my employees and future employees, but I'm going to be paying significantly less money. Is that better than being, in a top of the market type building? And these are operational questions that clients are asking about now.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good insight, and I appreciate kind of you sharing that insight of the next year and a half, because I think you get a unique view of it, especially from the demand side. Want to switch gears a little bit. I'd be remiss if we didn't mention SIOR, who's obviously a great partner of Crexi's as well. But for those who don't know, what is SIOR, and how did you get involved?
Okay, so SIOR, in essence, our goal is to be the preeminent organization for the top level commercial brokers throughout the globe. And we are going to be celebrating our 80th anniversary
Oh, wow.
later this year. And literally, our roots were in World War II, whereby the major manufacturers for steel mills and ammunition plants, et cetera, gathered a lot of realtors together to try to come up with these manufacturing sites. So that was the origin of SIOR. And we've only grown since then. And ultimately, what we're really striving to do is to basically be the best of the best. We want to have a standard of excellence in our industry. As I alluded to earlier, there are a number of people who look at this business as a great way to make money. That's not what I would call a standard of excellence. The standard of excellence has to be, how do you take care of your clients to the best level? How do you treat your other brokers and your other clients at the highest level? And then at the same time, then have an opportunity to be in a very, very fulfilling industry. So what we're looking at SAOR is to be that standard of excellence.
So I love that you touched on that, and obviously supporting the community, and it was definitely a hard year for many people around real estate. How did SIOR step in to help its members over the last 18 months?
Yeah, and I'll give Mark Ducla, who's our current president, credit, because he realized that the need was for us to continue to connect with our members. SAOR is a phenomenal networking organization, but with us not being able to have our in-person, global conferences or in-person chapter meetings, etc., we had to pivot. And in turn, the number of virtual meetings we had was off the charts. And I kind of like that, because now, as the president elect, I was able to attend far more chapter meetings across the globe than I ever would have. I think I was on at least three European chapter events. And in turn, even though it's not the same as meeting in person, I was able to have good, meaningful conversations with members that I would not have met before. And we also, at the same time, did this not only just for networking, but we did it for education as well. So we were able to provide up to date information to our members, that we were able to obtain through surveying all of our members and then just gathering as much data as possible. And I think we did the right thing, because when all is said and done, our retention rate from our members, is at 96%, which is basically our historical average. So even in a global pandemic, our members continued to maintain their memberships at SIOR. So that is really a testimony not only of the work that Mark Duclos did, but also of our entire staff in Washington, D.C.
Amazing. And so when did you join? I'm sorry, I forgot it. And then how?
I
Yeah.
am in my 19th year of SIOR right now.
Amazing, amazing. And how did you work your way up all the way to the top as president? What's that look like?
So my first meeting, I was in Dallas, Texas, and there was, I think, only one other person from our chapter that went to that conference. So I was kind of on my own. So there were a couple downtimes where there was nothing programmed. And so I saw that there was an education committee meeting. Had no clue what it was. Decided to just show up, and the administrator who was in there, she said, "Hey, Pat, sit down. Nice to meet you." And she actually realized that I was one of those people that tend to volunteer for everything. So over the next 18 years, I just was asked to be on different committees and would volunteer on doing more and more and more, not only from a local chapter standpoint, but also from a regional standpoint, and then just as importantly from a global standpoint. And then a few years ago was asked to run for global president. And it was really interesting because if they would have asked me a year earlier, my answer would have been no, for a couple of reasons. One, I was still owner of our Colliers Group in Pittsburgh, but I also had three kids who were either in college or about to enter college, and I just said it didn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense. However, the following year, it worked out extremely well because by that point in time, I was at CB. I also had, my partner Amy, who, as much as I love my wife, my first person I asked to, see whether or not I should be or at least run for SIOR president was
Mm-hmm.
Amy, because I knew my wife's first question was going to be, "How is your business going to go while you're also doing another full-time job?"
Right.
And because Amy was an SIOR and she understood the organization and truly, believed in it, she said, "We'll figure this out. You run." And then my wife and family were all on board. And in a weird way, it really worked out because with the pandemic, we all extended our term for another year, but there was no traveling during that time frame for obvious reasons. So the time commitment was not nearly what it normally would be. And I take over as global president this fall, and I already have one of my kids has graduated from college, the other one's at West Point, and then my other daughter will be graduating in May. So even from that standpoint, there was no reason for me not to be able to do not only my CB job, but now serve as SIOR global president. So it was just amazing how everything just aligned properly to allow me to at least run for this great position.
Absolutely. So SIOR's Create Conference is just around the corner. Maybe talk about that so our listeners can understand what's happening there and how it's different from conferences in the past.
So basically, what we tried to do over the past couple of years was to have our two conferences be a little bit different. So Create 360, and the title of it is where ideas become opportunity, whereby at Transact, which is our spring conference, that's where deals get done. So by that, the real gist of it is our programming and content that we're going to be providing at our Create 360 is literally going to be off the charts. We've realized, what our clients are looking for, and when I say our clients, I mean our SIOR members. Mm-hmm. And in turn, the content is going to be, as strong as possible for not only our industrial members, but also our office members, for our investment members. We're excited about that. And then hopefully, with all that content, when we all get together next spring in Phoenix, that's where, we have Transact 360,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where deals will hopefully then get done.
Got it. That sounds amazing. So one thing I want to leave you with is obviously coming in as president, and you touched on obviously the reverence you have for the great universities in Pittsburgh and obviously across the country. But what kind of programs are you guys working on or initiatives to drive a young, diverse membership growth?
And that is easily the number one thing that we want to accomplish. And it's not just from an SIOR perspective; it's from a commercial real estate perspective. Mm-hmm. Last week, we actually had as we'll call it, a summit, whereby we had myself and Mark Duclos from SIOR. We had the current president and incoming president for CCIM, and the current president and incoming president for IREM. Meet together to figure out how our organizations, through the National Association of Realtors, can improve our organizations. And the number one thing we kept coming back to is we need to get new people into our industry. And in the past, especially on the brokerage side, the only way you knew about the business was if your dad or your mom or your uncle or neighbor happened to be in the industry. And very few of us lucked out into getting into the industry, 6 years out of college with having no prior knowledge of the industry. So we realized we got to figure out how to open this up to everyone, because it doesn't matter if you're male, female, no matter what color you are. The reality of it is people that have the right personality and the right work ethic can get into commercial real estate and have a phenomenal career. It's not an industry for everybody. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met, far smarter than I, realized early on that brokerage and commercial real estate was not necessarily where they were going to succeed. But we have seen common threads of people who are personable, who are hardworking, and in a lot of cases, these are high school and college athletes. Because if you think about it, every athlete has had success and they've had failure, which fortunately or unfortunately also summarizes our industry. And the people who succeed in commercial real estate, and specifically in commercial brokerage, are those who can get up from losing a transaction or having something implode literally at the last minute and not miss a beat. And at the same time, not just get too excited when you get that big deal across the line and get it signed by both parties. Yes, you should celebrate for a little bit, but you can't just say, yep, I'm done now. You look at it like as a Tom Brady. Tom Brady's basically had, as I would call it, 15 years of Grand Slam commercial brokerage, where he would have been the top 0.1% of all brokers across the country, but always is looking to get better. That's what we're trying to do with SIOR. We want to get those type of people into our industry. And in order to do so, we are now reaching out to universities across the country that have real estate programs, and even some that don't have real estate programs, to make sure that their students are aware of our industry. We will provide education materials, speakers, etc., but also, create opportunities to get the students to come to our conferences, to come to our regional conferences as well, and to meet with the brokers, so that it allows our members to meet these students early on. Because we can typically tell somebody that's going to be successful in brokerage after a couple of different meetings. And we want to be able to set things up so these folks do look at and say, yeah, I want to be in commercial real estate versus, again, working at a bank or working in sales for pharmaceuticals or whatever the case might be, and realizing it is an avenue worth taking. The other thing that we've been doing is we have a foundation with SIOR that, in conjunction with our chapters, have provided scholarships to real estate students. And we realized that there's always a financial impact early on in one's career. So if we were able to provide 5, 10, in some cases $15,000+ scholarships to students to then not have student debt or whatever the case might be, it then gives them a much better runway to get into our industry and then be a success long term.
Absolutely. So Pat, I'll leave you with a final question. What's the best advice you could give to those young prospective brokers out there who want to get into the industry?
When, like anything that you do in life, do it to the absolute best of your ability and figure out how to always get better. I'll give you a perfect example. Education. SIOR has great education for commercial real estate, but CCIM has even better, especially for newer members. So even though I am the SIOR Global President-elect, I would tell anybody who is starting in commercial real estate to work with us as a member associate, which is a new program we have for younger members. But I also say, get that education from CCIM and from some of these other organizations. And don't stop. Once you get into the industry, always figure out how to get better. And sometimes that's just simply networking with potential mentors, potential peers, etc. Pick the brains of those of us who have been doing this for decades. Very few of us are not available to provide input to bring more people into this industry. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We would love the opportunity to help these new people coming into our industry, whether it's straight out of college or maybe a couple years out, like
Hmm.
I did, and give them the not only the negatives but also the positives of commercial real
Absolutely.
estate, so that they understand, hey, this is a career that really could be for me.
Yeah, no, Pat, thank you for those wide words. I think, just in general, it's great speaking with you today and meeting with you. I think you have such an interesting dynamic, getting a view into the industry, and obviously been in the business for so long. So can't thank you enough. I know you're a busy guy working two jobs. So just wanted to say thank you for joining us. And before we sign off, where can people find you online if they want to get in touch?
Uh, the easiest is always, my email address, which is patrick.sentner@cbre.com. However, I'm getting even more and more active on Twitter and LinkedIn. And then, honestly, feel free to text me at any point in time at 412-759-4991.
I love it. I love it. That'll reach new members for sure. Well, Pat, thanks so much for the time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Ryan, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode, do not miss the next one. Visit go.crexi.com/podcast and sign up to get the next episode delivered straight to your inbox. Of course, you can also subscribe to the Crexi Podcast on your favorite podcast app and check out our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care and be sure to tune in next time.